Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the At the Water's Edge podcast, where we look for insights beyond the headlines to take a practitioner's view on national security and geopolitics. It's the 4th of March, 2026. Let's get started. So, I don't know what y'all were expecting to happen this weekend, but I did not have us starting a war in the Middle East again in my bingo cards. Just wasn't counting on that to pop up this weekend. But hey, lo and behold, we're at war with Iran along with Israel. And Iran is at war with, well, at this point, most of the Middle East. Now, how we got here, why this war is happening, is something that will be hotly debated for years to come. What matters right now, though, is what happens next. What happens next inside of Iran? How does that impact people in the region? How does that influence our national security at home and with our service members and American civilians stationed around the world in the region? Well, to get some insight on how Iranians themselves are thinking about this and what some of the numerous resistance organizations that have wanted to overthrow Iran's government for generations now are viewing this new development, we brought back on Zolal Habibi from the National Council of Resistance of Iran to share her organization's thoughts on what this conflict means for their efforts, for the future of Iran, and for the region more broadly. Excited to get into this conversation. Important to note up front, there are multiple competing resistance organizations who wanted to overthrow the government of Iran. Zolal just represents one of those organizations. Invitations to come on the show have been extended to other groups, particularly the monarchist camp. We'll see if they come on and share their thoughts with us. We'd love to talk to them. And the claims of Zolal in this interview are solely those of her and the organization that she represents. With that, we'll have a quick note from our friends at the Work to Find Network, and then into our conversation with Zolal Habibi.
Life is too short not to work on solving cool problems with interesting people, and recruiting allows us to do both. I'm Brando, host of the Rebel TA podcast, a show where we share stories with people and talent leaders who are on a mission to empower the candidate-employer relationship in the future of work.
Well, good morning and welcome back to the podcast. How are you doing today?
Good. How are you doing? It's a pleasure to be able to be with you, and I'd like to take the time to greet everyone who's tuning in.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks for hopping back on. Normally don't cycle back to a topic this quickly on the show, but given recent events, it seemed timely. So even though you're just on, could you please introduce yourself in your own words to the audience?
Yes, my name is Zolal Habibi, and I am a member of the National Council of Resistance of Iran's Foreign Affairs Committee, and I've been an activist with the Iranian resistance for 27 years.
Yeah. And after 27 years, this might be one of the most interesting times in that particular span of your life, because even though we spoke a few weeks ago about efforts that your organization was taking to overthrow the current regime in Iran, this past weekend, Israel and America decided to kick off a war. The Ayatollah is now dead. There's missiles and drones flying all over the Middle East. Casualties on both sides. We don't have an accurate count, but even U.S. service members are dying. Things are escalating quickly. So I got to ask, were you guys expecting something like this? Did you have any inkling that a war might be kicking off? Or was this as much of a surprise to your organization as it was to everybody else?
I think that, I didn't think that we, to the extent of my knowledge, I don't think we thought that this would be the path taken. But there were signs, that this was an issue that was on the table, and I think just due to the crisis in the Middle East and the situation, this was something that's been brewing. But the reality is, as I think we spoke about this previously too, we don't see war as a solution to Iran. And we still stand by that we don't think the solution to Iran is neither war nor appeasement. It's supporting the Iranian people for them to be able to take their destiny into their own hands and to be able to overthrow the regime in its entirety and to be able to form the path forward and what that democracy would look like. I think that right now, as we're seeing, and this is something that I think we have kind of pointed out to before, but the reality is that democracy can't be installed in a country, and the reality is that yes, Khamenei has been eliminated, but the regime is still there. The system is still there. There are talks of, looking for someone within the system to come and maybe reform the system. That's not realistic. This regime, its nature doesn't allow it to be reformed. And so that
Gotcha.
is why the people of Iran are looking for a complete regime change. But they think that, and we believe that we have to create that change ourselves because we do have, you know, the experience of foreign intervention in our country. We do have that experience. I mean, worldwide, everywhere you go. The reality is that, you know, a stable, truly independent democracy does not come out of, foreign war.
Hmm.
And so, especially when it's a country with the geopolitical importance of Iran. Right now, you were just mentioning, that there are rockets and missiles flying all over the region right now. It has really escalated to un um, unparalleled, I think, proportions. I mean, just the fact that within 1, 2 days, you see like practically every country
Yeah.
in the region is now
The
involved in.
geographic expanse of the conflict puts what was happening in Iraq and Afghanistan to shame by comparison. I mean, those were intense, but they were contained to their countries largely. This is the
Yeah.
entire region is getting hit.
Yeah, and it's going to have its consequences and casualties and everything. And so the impact this needs to be, thought of. And I know that in the media, a lot of these different aspects are not covered. So it's really important to understand, the implications of a war and
Hmm.
to understand like what comes after. But I think that from the first hours, the Iranian resistance actually made its position clear. We are concentrating on the message of the Iranian people and what that looks like for us. Um, I think that something that was very important is that on Saturday morning, Mrs. Rajabi, the president-elect of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, did announce um, the, you know, um, provisional government for the transitional period. This is something that has been outlined by the NCRI, not from today, but from 1981, October 1981, at the time when the Iranian resistance realized that this regime is not reformable and is going to have to be overthrown eventually. And that is what we have been concentrating on. And I think it's also very important to note because a lot of people don't know this. The reality is, after the uprisings that broke out in end of December 2025, and after the bloodbath that the Iranian regime created, the massacre of um, the innocent people who had taken to the streets for their rights and to stand in face of this regime. Um, right after that, we saw, you know, uh, there was complete martial law throughout Iran. The regime was doing everything that it can to be able to keep its grip on power and to spread fear in society. But the people of Iran didn't uh, sit back,
Hmm.
and I think that's really important.
What
They
has been the
turned
impact of
everything.
this war on the protest movement that was going on? Well, as early as last week, has this increased the level of protest in the streets? Has this, ended those protests because the streets are too violent? I mean, has this war accelerated the goal of those protests, or has it derailed
Well,
the effort?
yeah, unfortunately, like, I mean, in a situation of war, protests are not very feasible and possible, due to the difficulties on the ground and the situation, especially because, like, for instance, right now, everywhere you look, especially in Tehran, is being hit. but the people have taken other forms of resistance and continuation. That is what I wanted to address. Was last week, about 5 days actually before the start of this war, we saw that 250 members of the resistance units, or who actually serve as the liberation army for the people of Iran, they carried out a very extensive operation on Pastor, the headquarters of Khamenei, the same place that was targeted on Saturday. And at that point, the regime did everything in its power for the news of this not to spread. But there are 250 members of resistance units involved in it, and about 100 of them were killed or detained. But that was something that was unprecedented in the past 2 decades, and the Iranian regime had, their reaction was, what has happened, or like how weak have we become that in the most secure location in all of Iran, and at the height of security, because there were talks of the negotiations and threats of war taking place just like 2 days before. But despite of all that, this operation was actually carried out in Tehran, and so that had its message for the regime, and it showed to many inside the regime that how weak they actually are, and that's something that they didn't have an understanding of. And it was I also simultaneous with the the ceremonies being held throughout Iran for the 40th day of mourning of those who had been killed by the regime. So we were seeing the activities of resistance units practically after the suppression of the protests, but we saw them continuing their fight against the regime. And one of the things that I'd like to note is just in the last few days too, I mean, simultaneous with the fact that this war is going on, but independently, you see, the brave people of Iran who are continuing their fight against the regime. Just on Sunday, I believe it was, they, sorry, the executive headquarters of Khomeini's order, it's an entity that is in charge of plunder of the people of Iran. They were targeted by the resistance units, and they were able to actually go in and take complete control and be able to distribute a lot of those goods and whatever to people inside of across Iran. This was done in Hashgerd in Karaj, and one of the barracks of the regime was actually attacked in Hashgerd in Karaj. And not only were they able to disarm the suppressive forces, they were able to actually arm the people to be able to protect themselves in face of this regime and to be able to fight back. But we also saw yesterday that in both in Marivan and also in Mahabad, that the people attacked actually the prisons there, and they were able to have the detainees from the uprisings and the political prisoners all released. So we are seeing, the fact that people are mobilizing on the ground to be able to take this fight to the next level, and to be able to make sure that the people of Iran are able to, I guess, pin put in the final pin in the coffin of this regime.
Yeah. So obviously in a country, there's diverse political perspectives, and you yourself represent an opposition movement that wants to overthrow the government. There's other opposition movements with their own agendas, but there is some sort of base of support for the current regime in Iran, especially amongst the IRGC. And a lot of times when countries go to war, especially when countries are seen to have been attacked, we see this rally around the flag effect. Do you think some of the folks that aren't very closely aligned with any political faction in Iran will actually increase their support for the current regime while this war is ongoing?
I don't think that's very likely when it comes to Iran. The reality is that um, the regime has broken those bridges behind it, because it has killed so much and so ruthlessly against the people of Iran that I don't think it has the power to rally around the flag. like that is exactly what Khomeini did during the Iran-Iraq war. And the regime has always used foreign war or, their warmongering to do that exactly. One of the things that Khamenei used to always say is we have to fight in the streets of Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen, to not fight on the streets of Tehran, Isfahan, Shiraz. Well, we have seen now that that has, how that came about. I also think that even according to the regime itself, only like 5% of the population support the regime, according to themselves,
Hmm.
And the reality is that, yes, there are those who do have interest in this regime staying because their lifeline depends on this regime, be it the IRGC or be it like, people who are financially or, politically, they are aligned with this regime. And there are those who, even ideologically still align themselves with this regime. But that's a very, very small percentage and it's not something major. And I think that at the end of the day, they are probably more opportunistic than that. I don't think that they truly, for the most part, most of them don't truly believe in this regime. They just depend on this regime. So when they see that the days of this regime are limited,
Mhm.
they're going to change
Th-
their
They're here for
their
the
camp.
spoils, not for the cause.
Yeah. And the
Gotcha.
reality is that we are already seeing that, like for instance, people who were supporting this regime till about 2 years ago or even last year, and now all of a sudden they are diehard monarchy supporters. It's
Gotcha.
just something that you're seeing.
Well, you mentioned, over the weekend, and our, yeah, National Council for Resistance of Iran launched the provisional government. They formed it up. I understand that's something you guys had planned to be ready to do for quite some time. How has this war impacted the unity amongst different resistance factions? Are monarchists now working with your organization? Are the Republic folks and the Kurdish folks coming together? What does the opposition to the current regime look like now that the Ayatollah is dead, this war is ongoing, and there seems to be this generational opportunity to actually overthrow the regime?
I think that one of the things that's also outlined in the message that was given by Mr. Bajavi is the issue of the importance of unity and solidarity in these times. The reality is that I think we are seeing a united front coming together. We see, like, for instance, if you look, and especially in the last month, even, you see, the different ethnicities of Iran coming together with the NCRI or with the MEK. So you're seeing that that has become like a united front from different um, groups who, you know, uh, are mostly aligned. I guess you would consider them more left or like Marxist Leninist or whatnot. So you see them coming together. You see the Republicans coming together. I mean one of the main lines that they're drawing is the I guess the front that is opposed to all forms of tyranny, be it turbaned or crowned. That is like one of the slogans from the universities in Iran. They say no to the crown, no to the turban, yes to democracy and equality. I mean, that is like something that has a coalition that is coming together and they are working together and they do support one another. And this is also something that was, as I said, outlined in the message that was given by Mrs. Rajavi. Unfortunately, right now we're not seeing that full uh, united front because um, there's one of the forces that, or one of the groups that's creating division among Iranians is the monarchist camp. And we just saw last week how Reza Pahlavi actually um, targeted the Kurdish ethnicity, and labeling them as, separationist and this
Mhm.
and that, and actually making threats against them. But then on the other hand, you see that unity among Iranians. But I would like to draw actually your attention to part of the message that Mrs. Rajabi gave on Saturday, because I think it addresses this exactly. If I could read like
Please.
a short segment of it.
Mhm.
It was a message because I think you understand, on Saturday morning everyone was just like waiting to see like what is going on, what is happening, and everyone was looking for direction. And well, this was the message that she gave. She says, fellow compatriots, our homeland continues to endure greater pain and destruction under the rule of religious fascism. In these difficult circumstances, I call on all of you, especially the courageous youth of our country, to care for civilians and the general public, particularly children and the elderly. Protect them and help each other. Now is a time for solidarity. Our strength lies in the unity and cohesion of our people against the religious dictatorship and the remnants of monarchy and its fascism that seek to steal the democratic revolution. At this critical moment, I call upon our compatriots and all forces of Iran's democratic revolution to remain vigilant and prepared. I reiterate that the ultimate solution is the overthrow of this regime and the determination of Iran's destiny by Iranian people and the organized resistance, by the brave sons and daughters of a nation in the resistance units and the ranks of the Liberation Army. Our path leads towards um, the future and the establishment of a democratic republic, not a return to the buried dictatorships of the past. Based on the 10-point plan announced for the transfer of sovereignty to the people of Iran, the National Council of Resistance of Iran announced the provisional government. The precedent for such a provisional government dates back to October 19. I declared to the international community that only the people of Iran possess the legitimacy to determine the political future of their country. Iran is not its regime, Iran is its people. No future for Iran can be realized from the outside. It can only be built by the Iranian people themselves. I call on all to support the people of Iran. As Iranian people demonstrated during the January uprising, they seek a future based on a democratic republic and reject both the Shah and the mullahs. Our homeland has passed through many turbulent periods. It will pass through this moment as well, but within the People's Front, we must choose unity, solidarity, and hope, and be prepared to pay whatever price it requires. Long live the people of Iran. Victory to Iran's democratic revolution.
Lovely sentiment. So, this provisional government that was formed, is it just the NCRI, or are there members of other opposition factions in the government?
I think that this is something that we're going to have to wait and see, and I'm sure that step by step it's going to be, announced. But I think this is something that's in the process, so we will have to, wait and see and hear more about it. But what was the initial plan for the provisional government was the NCRI, but the NCRI in itself does have, different organizations and groups and ethnicities and minorities represented. So it would be something that's more of like an umbrella um, movement.
Gotcha. I've read that the NCRI's association with the MEK, the People's Mujahideen Forces of Iran, is a contentious issue amongst other factions of the opposition. Have you guys seen an issue with how the MEK operates in Iran, and your ability to form coalitions with other factions?
To be honest, no, I think that it just depends on who is saying that, and like what is their understanding of the situation. The reality is that the MEK were the ones who actually founded the NCRI to be able to provide that opportunity to have, groups unite together and come together to be able to fight against the regime. Because the MEK was fighting against the regime. They didn't need that, but they realized that, others were being marginalized and they didn't have that possibility. And to be able to overthrow this regime, you need that unity and you need to be able to create that front. And so they, made this offer in July 1981, and since then, it has been formed and organized. Yes, the MEK is the biggest organization in the NCRI right now, but it only has one vote, the same way that any, even a smaller organization does. So it doesn't matter, like for instance, if you're the Fadai guerrillas or if you're the MEK, it's just one vote and one representative when it comes to how the system is built. So the reality is that I don't think that is a realistic issue. But another hard truth is that when this fight has been continuing for over 4 decades, there are people who are groups who do not withstand the test of time, and who have pulled away at one point or another, or like for instance, they were even dismissed from the NCRI because they passed one of the red lines, because there are only 3 criterions for the NCRI. One is that you have to believe in the complete overthrow of the regime. 2, separation of religion and state. And the third is having a republic for Iran. So it's only 3, issues, but they're very, important points. Like for instance, if you're going to go and negotiate with the regime, I'm sorry, you can't be in the NCRI because, you've been infiltrated by the regime in that path. And unfortunately, those groups who didn't realize this and why the NCRI was, had so much emphasis on this, they ended up paying the price for it, unfortunately. And I mean, we wish it wasn't that way, but at the negotiation table with the regime, they were killed or whatnot. So that is something that we saw, or how, those who fell in the trap of Khatami and they thought, oh, maybe the regime is reformable. Well, 30 years later, now it's, crystal clear to everyone that this regime is not reformable. And unfortunately, they lost their own legitimacy by aligning themselves or trying to believe in that maybe this regime is reformable. So, I mean, you have to understand the whole process and everything that has happened over these decades. But the reality is that right now, even because the NCRI emphasizes on the importance of, solidarity and unity among all different groups, even if we don't agree on a lot of things, there are certain things that we can agree on, as we were just mentioning before. I think right now you are seeing like that coming together, groups that may differ in a lot of views, and we might have criticism of one another, or just not see eye to eye on certain issues. But we agree on, moving forward means a secular democratic republic. That in itself. And that, under that wider umbrella, that is something that the NCRI has actually called for since 2002, and has said that they're even willing to, in it, they clearly state you could disagree with the provisional government plan of the NCRI or any of, the plans of the NCRI. You don't have to agree with it, but we extend, that hand in solidarity because we think that is what's needed to overthrow the regime. And that even the NCRI is willing to pay or take responsibility for all costs to make that possible, for these people to come together, sit at the table and work together to be able to overthrow the regime. And that is an offer that has stood for 20 years. We also have to understand, I mean, when it comes to the issue of Iran, unfortunately, I was talking to someone actually a while ago, and they're like, in regards to even the demonstrations in the diaspora, there's a price to come and attend one of the protests in support of the NCRI, or of the supporters of the NCRI. That means from tomorrow, you can't go to Iran, you can't travel back and forth to Iran, you can't, it comes with a price. The Iranian regime is going to threaten your family. just this both this February and also in September that we had huge rallies in Europe, people actually received SMS messages from the Iranian regime threatening their loved ones in Iran if they attend these demonstrations. We had people whose parents or brothers, sisters, even their children were arrested in Iran or taken in because they attended these events. And that has been a constant over these years. So I mean, you have to understand not everyone's going to be willing to pay that price. And I mean, that's understandable. Not everyone is a revolutionary, you know what I mean? I mean, not everyone's going to want to, I mean, you have to understand society. In society, it's usually a very small percentage that put that responsibility on their shoulders and move forward. And you shouldn't be expecting that from everyone. We call it in Farsi, we say, you know, the gray zone. There are a lot of people who are in the gray zone. So when there's an uprising, you see them, you know, on the streets, you know, enthusiastic, active. Like you think that this person has been a revolutionary like their entire lives. But the reality is that once it starts getting a bit longer, if it's after, you know, after 3-4 months, you start seeing them, you know, being non-existent and we're going back to their normal lives.
Yeah.
And that is the reality, unfortunately. But
you bring up
you
a
will
really
hear,
interesting point there because, yeah, trying to overthrow a government comes with all sort of costs and risks, and not a lot of people want to get involved with that, and for all sorts of legitimate reasons. It's a painful process for you and your family. But there's seems to be this unique moment in time to push for the overthrow of the regime. Unity amongst the resistance is absolutely critical. Outside of your organization specifically, the largest opposition movement to the current Iranian regime by support, and these numbers are very hard to verify, but just general reporting, does appear to be the monarchists. And based off of the goal of a secular democratic republic, they're from the outside looking in, there doesn't seem to be anything that would keep you guys from aligning with the monarchists, not behind them, but pulling in their support, coming to some sort of agreement, and using that united front to help push out the regime in Iran. Because we've even seen, England, constitutional monarchy, one of the most robust democratic societies in the world. There's models for how this can work successfully. And some would even argue that having that model works better than, the Jeffersonian democracy model that we have in the United States. There's all sorts of nuance to this. But in this moment where there does seem to be this opportunity, is it worth building that relationship and using that united front to help push out the current regime? Because you're right, not a lot of people want to get involved directly with this, but there does seem to be a unique window of opportunity here. Is now the time to revisit some of these relationships?
well, I think that it depends on unity is important, but on what? There needs to be some grounds that you create that unity on. And what are your red lines? I think that, on the monarchist front right now, I mean, if you look at the plan that Reza Pahlavi has presented just this summer, he calls for the revival of the Savak, the revival of the Eternal Guards, which is what IRGC was named during the Shah's time. So it's the suppressive forces. The fact that he says we keep the system intact to be able to show so the suppressive forces stay, some of these entities stay. That is not something that we can unite with. And I mean, if he was standing as on his own 2 feet, on his own merits, not being the crowned prince and the son of his father was overthrown by the people of Iran in a popular revolution. Unfortunately, that revolution was hijacked. But that doesn't change the fact that the people of Iran revolted against monarchy. And they revolted against his father specifically. I mean, if you're going to be talking about monarchy, so why not say the Qajar dynasty? You know what I mean? I mean, that had a longer precedent too. I mean, his father and grandfather ruled Iran with iron fist for 53 years. The people of Iran revolted against that. just imagine in like 50 years, people are like, well, uh, I hope this never happens, this scenario, but like there's a dictator in Iran. People are like, well, why don't you go and, create a coalition with Khamenei's son, Mojtaba? No, he's a dictator. It's one thing if he came and said, my father was wrong, admit to the fact that his father was wrong, that his father used torture and execution and suppressed his people and killed, massacred the ethnicities of Iran. There was, poverty, there was, corruption in the system. And then you say, well, now I'm standing as my own person, and this is my plan, and this is what I've done for the people of Iran. Something, have like one paper, like a one-page resume, even. He
Hmm.
doesn't have that. So what are we going to, work on? And on the other hand, I mean, what is it that you're promoting? I mean, just, you know, if you had asked me this same question maybe like a few years ago, maybe I would have been a bit more lenient to the thought. But the reality is that the more we move forward, the more it's becoming very clear, especially for our generation. We're the generation that was born after the 1979 revolution. We haven't seen the things that, were perpetrated back then, but we're getting a glimpse of it in the past, especially from 2022 till now. Because before 2022, let's be honest, the monarchy camp was non-existent. I
Hmm.
mean, anywhere, really. Um, but in these past few years, I mean, the fact that, one of their slogans is make Savak great again, or Savak 2.0, and things like that. I mean, where does that come from? The fact that they are so, um, you know, the uh, discriminatory views that they have, like the way that they look at Iran's ethnicities and deal with them and label them and harass them and, uh, you know, just their unfortunate. I mean, we're seeing the growth of fascism, neo-fascism in our country right now, in that front, in that camp. And also, if you look at all of those who are the closest circle to Reza Pahlavi right now, they're all defectors of the regime. I'm not sure if it's the regime that has, infiltrated his system or that he's now working with the regime, but look at them. They're all defectors of the regime who are heading his camp. There's like video footage that they're making threats on people. Like, for instance, at a protest, people have like signed Women Life Freedom. They're going in solidarity. They have joined the same protest that, they're it's going to be presented as supporters of the Shah. These people have gone there and they're being threatened. Either you say Javid Shah, which means long live the king, or we're going to deal with you. And they attack these people. And you're not even in power yet, and you're already doing that with. Even Khomeini didn't do that with the opposition. Khomeini, till the minute that he arrived in Iran, he said, "Yeah, we're gonna have freedom of speech, and I respect all the other groups. They're the ones who have paid the price for this revolution, this and that." And then afterwards, that mask came off. But
Yeah.
the mask is coming off before, so that's not really something that you can create a coalition with when they're the only, like, the protest that they had in Munich. There was no slogan against Khamenei, not even once. No slogan in regards to all those who had been killed, the political prisoners, the detainees, nothing. It was only Javid Shah, meaning, long live the king. And first of all, he says that I don't want to be king, I just want to be the leader of the transitional period. But then why is the only chant in your demonstrations long live the king, and you have no problem with that? Because if
Gotcha.
you do believe in it,
Hmm.
having
You'd want him to say
giving
something.
that choice, you'll be like, please don't use that title. Right?
Yeah.
I'm not, that's not what I'm standing for. Um, and then the other was like, Pahlavi will return. That was the other slogan. This is the final fight. Pahlavi will return.
Okay.
Those were the only two slogans that were given, and that should raise alarm bells. I mean, what are you there to echo the voice of the Iranian people, or are you there to promote yourself? And how are people supposed to actually come and join in solidarity when that is the only thing that you're promoting? Because, that's not what we stand for. And I think that he actually he just did an interview on Fox on Sunday, and there he mentions, um, for my return to Iran, it needs to be orchestrated. That is exactly the point. We believe in we need to create the change. He believes that he needs to be placed there. It needs to be orchestrated. So
So
that
he's
is
asking
why,
the international community to come in and put him in power.
yeah, and specifically, I mean,
Interesting.
the US and Israel, and that's what they've been promoting. Like that's why that's the only slogan that comes out of their mouth. And that's why they actually even um, you know, manipulate the realities on the ground and what is happening to be able to present that and to try to show like and the fact that I'm sorry, but the people of Iran, a nation, is paying the price to create change in Iran with their lives. And when, even as someone who has actually like, okay, I have dedicated actually decades of my life to the fight for freedom in Iran. He hasn't done anything for Iran. But if you listen to his messages, it's like, I, me, I. And like, where's the people of Iran?
Hmm.
Who are you to be dictating to them? And what do you stand for at the end of the day? And that is something that, you know, for a nation that has the experience of, fighting both a theocracy and a, um, a, I mean, a dictator like the Shah, like the monarchy that we used to have. These are, alarm bells for Iranian people, and these are things that shouldn't be taken lightly. I think that um, in Munich he was asked some of these questions, and he just diverted and didn't answer, didn't respond to them really. He was offended when the one of the televisions in France actually asked him about his, father's legacy, and like the fact that, your father had perpetrated crimes in Iran, and he was all defensive on it and like, why are you saying that about my father? And he didn't. But that's the reality. And then, you know, Channel One in France was attacked by monarchists for asking these questions. Like, it was an interview. They're supposed to ask questions, and
Yeah.
but that is like the nature that we're seeing, and that is something that I think maybe a lot of people who are watching, like following on the news or in the US or in the media, they're not seeing that aspect of it, but that aspect
Hmm.
actually exists. And the fact that even right now, I mean, um, it's very important to understand the complexity of Iran. Iranians, they do want to create a unified front, but you have to understand like, who are you forming that solidarity with, and what do they stand for? And you can't, you know, in this instance, the enemy of my enemy is not my friend,
Gotcha.
especially if it's not actually the enemy of your enemy. But yeah.
Yeah. So what's actually missing to get to the next stage of this where the current regime is overthrown? Ayatollah's dead. A lot of his leadership's dead. Resistance movements are, to the extent possible, trying to come together. What do the next steps to push this regime out actually look like from your point of view?
I think from my point of view, I think the next step really concentrates on the situation inside of Iran and what is happening on the ground in Iran. I think that more and more we are going to be seeing, you know, the liberation armies role, like sort of armed resistance, because this regime is not going to be, it's not a regime that's going to be overthrown through just peaceful protest. And that is a phase that I think we have entered at this point.
Is there a
And
liberation army on the ground there right now? Has the mech evolved into that? We talked about that briefly last time,
yes,
but okay, so there is an armed opposition group on the ground right now. Okay.
yes. I mean, that is the whole strategy of resistance units, which was presented by this resistance about 14 years ago or 13 years ago now. Um, that is what it's based on. These resistance units serve as the future units of the National Liberation Army. And since last last week, I think with the operation of the 250 members of the resistance units who targeted Pastor and like everything that we've been seeing in the last few days, these are that is the formation of the Liberation Army inside of Iran, and that is actually what we're also seeing. It's not only the MEK who is doing this. You also see like the Kurds and the Baluch who are doing this, and they're fighting the regime too. So I think it's on different fronts, and once this all comes together, that is the force that is going to be overthrowing this regime, and that is what uh, will bring about that regime change that we need to see. But what's important is for the international community to recognize that, and to recognize the both the people's right to resist and continue to fight, but also to recognize the provisional government, to be able to set the grounds for that and to be able to move forward.
Gotcha. One thing we've discussed is that, National Council of Resistance of Iran really prides itself on maintaining its independence from foreign organizations. But with the airstrikes ongoing, with the war starting, with this opportunity to form this liberation army and actually push the regime out, is now a time where some type of coordination with America, with Israel, is necessary, just from a purely practical standpoint, to actually push this regime out. Otherwise, the same organizations that are part of this liberation army, are they then themselves targeted by America and Israel as they become more visible?
I think that is something that we would have to see, but I think that based on principle, I think our independence is the most key factor, especially in these times. I mean, more than ever, right now is the day that our independence is really key. The reality is that the people of Iran, we shouldn't owe, like as a movement, we shouldn't owe anyone except the people of Iran anything. That's and what we owe the people of Iran is to be able to finally give them the freedom and that democracy that they truly deserve and yearn. And I hope that will be soon.
Okay. So right now you described 3 different organizations that are going to be part of this liberation army. You've got the MEK, you got the Kurds with their the Peshmerga forces. Yeesh, I can talk today. Everyone out there in the Balochistan, Baloch people, which have launched successful operations inside of Pakistan and other countries in the area. What's the risk, do you think, that this liberation army forms, the current regime gets overthrown, and then these 3 armed factions look at each other and go, we're all going our own separate ways? And you guys might end up with Tehran, but Kurdistan's gone, Balochistan, they're out. Is that something that could happen?
No, I don't think the scenario of civil war is realistic when it comes to Iran. And I think these forces have actually reiterated
I know some Kurds who would challenge that, but okay.
Well, no. But the thing is that the Kurds in Iran, I mean, rightly so, they have been suppressed systematically for a century, right? Or even more than that. And they stand for, like, they understand that the autonomy, like a Iran where Kurdistan will have autonomy, is their ideal.
What's the line between autonomy and independence?
Autonomy, because that is to their benefit to stay in Iran.
Sounded like a monarchist there, but okay.
Huh?
You sounded like a monarchist there, right?
No. I said the autonomy. No. They just don't recognize their rights. We say, we recognize their rights, but we also recognize Iran. And I think that you have to understand that for the past 5,000 years, I mean, Iran's ethnicities have always lived side by side and never had like any issues in that regard. Unfortunately, as Mrs. Rajavi stated, I think the people of Iran and the government of Iran are 2 different things. So the people of Iran, in fact, have shown how much respect that they have and understand that Iran is its ethnicities and the people. I mean, it's all of us together. That is what Iran is. In 2022, you saw the protests. I mean, everything began from Kurdistan, from the death of Mahsa Amini, who was, a Kurdish woman. But you also saw the continuation of the uprisings with the Baluch. And unfortunately, if you look in 2025, look at the number of people who've been executed in Iran. It's mostly from the Baluch and Kurdish ethnicities who are, the targets of this regime. So they're the ones who have been paying the price for this fight, too. And so that is something that we recognize and we respect. And in fact, to be honest, if you speak to many Kurds who have been following this issue, like completely, like the political spectrum of it, the most complete plan for the autonomy of Kurdistan was actually given by the MEK, which is even more, it's more, it's actually, what's it called? It's more progressive than the plan that the NCRI actually has right now, which has been, ratified by the NCRI, that it had presented in 1979, actually. And that is why the good relationships between the Kurds and the MK. But even the plan that was ratified by the NCRI at the time, the Democratic Party of Kurdistan was a member of the NCRI, and even they stated that this is more than they had ever even planned themselves, or they had in their own ideas and plans. But in recent months, actually, there has been a lot of Kurdish leaders have been addressing this issue, and the fact that they do want they're not separate, they're not seeking to be separated from Iran, and that they stand for the democracy, they want autonomy for Kurdistan and democracy for Iran. And that, so in that regard, in regards to both those from the Arab ethnicities of Iran or the Baluch, they also stand for a united Iran too. And but it's really important to understand that these people have been systematically abused and discriminated against, and so you really need to address that. And unfortunately, they are the richest areas of Iran, but the most impoverished. And that is something we need to recognize. That is something that we need to address. And that is something that we need to, be able to um, to to attend to in a free Iran. And I think that is something that we feel very strongly about in the
Mhm.
Iranian resistance. And that is something that is also seen in the ranks of this movement and the MEK specifically too, because it's very interesting. If you look at the MEK, the secretary generals of the MEK throughout these past, like, I don't know, 40 years, you see we have a secretary general who was Kurd. We have a secretary general who was from this, from the Khuzestan Ahvaz province, area of Iran. We have those who were from the northern part, from every part of Iran. You see them represented there, and that is like the beauty of this movement, that it doesn't. Before anything, I think all of us want to see Iran strive and as a country, and to be able to live side by side um, as a nation, all these ethnicities, and to respect that. I mean, I think that if you look, the Turks in Iran say everyone in Iran is a Turk. They just don't know it because they're so extensive in Iranians. But the reality is that we have so many. We have the Turkmen Sahra. We have the so the Turkmens, the Baluch, the Arabs, the Kurds. All of these are the ethnicities that they make Iran. They're part and parcel of Iran, and that is something that is makes Iran the beautiful country that it is. And I think that the same way that like the U.S. used to always boast that it's a melting pot well, Iran has all those ethnicities, and that is what makes this, this rug that we say like so beautiful, because there's so many different designs in it, and there's so many different people from all walks of life in it.
Okay. Well, that's a lovely sentiment, but I got one more, practical, messy question for you before we start to wrap this up because I know we're getting close on time. Um, it's great that this movement that you're espousing purports to be so inclusive. Um, representation was lovely. But what would you say to outsiders who look at this and think that Iran is very quickly on its road to being the next failed state? Because it's one thing to have a plan, it's another thing to be able to execute it. So what confidence can you offer the international community that if this provincial government, does come to power inside of Iran, the regime does fall, that they're actually going to be able to run the institutions of state and hold things together long enough to get to something like free and fair elections? Because we've seen this constantly when regimes change. Folks show up, they gut the government, they end up gutting it too deep in pursuit of getting rid of the previous regime, and things completely fall apart before something else new can take hold. So, what would you offer folks who look at this and are very concerned that Iran's very quickly on its road to being the next Libya?
Well, I think that one of the things that sets Iran apart is having that organized resistance. And this is something that I know seems like repeating myself, but the reality is that it is very different. Um, it's very different when something is just written on paper, or isn't just in words, or it's been working in practice. And I mean, if you understand the complex, I mean, let's be honest, like the hurdles that this movement has faced, the you know the obstacles it has come face to face with and has been able to persevere. The fact that due to the policy of appeasement, there was a time that, not one or two or 10 governments, but even more than that, a dozen governments were trying to have MEK removed in its entirety and just finish it, unfortunately. But we stood. We paid the price for it, but we stood, and we are striving, and we've grown from those times. And the reality is that, I mean, if you even look at specific experiences that they've had, first of all, I think the 10-point plan, that is, the context and the guiding force, I guess, here. I mean, if you go through it, it answers a lot of those what ifs that you may have. Like, for instance, what happens, like, as you said, they're gutting this regime, the previous regime, but it might go too deep because it creates, that cycle. Well, in the third point in the 10-point plan, Mrs. Rajavi says, the elimination of all forms of torture, and also of the abolition of the death penalty. I think that is very key to make sure that this, you don't create a cycle of killing and death again, because that is what creates, that atmosphere. The fact that it calls for independent judiciary, calls it for independent systems, it calls for, being aligned with international declarations and whatnot. So that creates like a guideline of, where we're going and the direction that we're going in. The fact that it says, the Sharia law needs to be completely abolished, that all the suppressive forces need to be completely removed from society, and to be able to build that, and how, like, the fact that councils need to be created, and how this system is going to work. These are things that have been outlined. But also, just look at how and here specifically, I'm going to address the MEK, which is one of the main organizations, and the NCRI, but look how it has been able to run itself over these decades. Look, they were forced to flee Iran overnight, practically. They went and they started, building everywhere they went. First, it was in the Kurdistan area, and then they came to Iraq, and then they built Ashraf from a barren desert to the oasis of of Iraq. People called it a pearl in the middle of the desert and whatnot. And this is Iraqis, not even Iranians, who were saying that. And they were able to then, after Ashraf going to Camp Liberty and the situation that they had there, but they still were able to build the city even under those very, very difficult times that, there were lawmakers who were calling it concentration camps, and not people who use these terms lightly, but they were able to overcome that. And then in Albania, the fact that they built Ashraf 3 within a few months, a full running, city, and, that in itself for the people of Iran is a sign that, they, wherever they go, it's not one instance. They're able to do that. And so they're willing to make that system, and they're willing to put that effort in. And the fact that, they have thousands of members who have dedicated their entire lives to the cause of freedom. So they're not in it for, it's not a job to them. It's not a 9 to 5 to them. It's not an income or point of salary or whatever. It is their life mission to be able to give that freedom to the people of Iran. So they're going to put everything into it. There was a conference, actually, it didn't, the resistance didn't have time to actually really publish it too much or talk about it. It was actually a few days before the start of the uprising, in December. There was a conference actually held by Iranian experts from like different fields who had come together, who all support the NCRI and its 10-point plan. And they were talking about, the plans and things that they have for the future of Iran, and how this transition is going to be possible. These were people who are really the cream of the crop of Iran society when you look at it from a, you know, uh, expert point of view. Like, for instance, there are people from like NASA, Caltech, here, there, who were all coming here in this conference. The head of, some of the top research institutes in Europe. They're all. It's very interesting that they were sharing some statistics about, how Iranians are present in practically like every university in the US has at least one Iranian professor. And the fact that Iran has the greatest brain drain in the world, but the greatest asset of the Iranian people is its own people, really, of Iran. And so if you are able to create those grounds for these people to actually come and serve their own people, I think we're going to see Iran flourish and very fast. I know that there are going to be a lot of obstacles, and I know that it's not easy because unfortunately, there isn't a single area in Iran or a field in Iran that you could put your finger on that has not been completely destroyed by this regime. But I think that there are many Iranians from across the board. I'm not saying just the supporters of the NCRI. I think there are a lot of good-hearted Iranians, both inside of the country and outside of the country, who would want to be part of that, rebuilding that country and to be able to build that Iran that they want to see. And I think that there we will see that true unity shine through when we do have a democratic system. I think once that democratic system is in place, and people know that, they can, through their own votes, they can change the path of their country, however direction that they want to take it in. I think that you will see people stepping up to the plate to be able to do that. And I think that hopefully we could set a new precedent and an example for other countries, instead of saying, next time you'll say, maybe it'll be another Iran at a positive note. And so it's not going to be another Libya or Syria or
Well, there's a
Iraq and
first time for
Afghanistan.
everything. So I'm
Yeah.
very skeptical, but hey, I'm happy to be proven wrong. Well, Zolal, thank you so much for joining on this morning. Really appreciate your insights. Hopefully this turns out better for everybody in the end. My hopes aren't particularly high, but hey, I'm cynical by nature. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me.